All right, so now that I've read something completely, or did something completely, honest about myself, let's read another chapter of Dune. You have read that Muad'Dib have no playmates his own age on Caladan. The dangers were too great, but Muad'Dib did have wonderful companion teachers. There was Gurney Halleck, the troubadour warrior. You will sing some of Gurney's songs as you read along in the book. There was Thufir Hawat, the old mentor master of assassins, who struck fear even into the heart of the Padashah Emperor. Padishah Emperor. There was Duncan Idaho, the swordmaster of Guinness, pronunciation. And Wellington Ewa, the name black in treachery but bright in knowledge. The Lady Jessica, who guided her son in the Bene Gesserit way. And of course, Duke Leto, whose qualities as a father have been long overlooked. From the Child History of Muad'Dib by the Princess Irulan. So that's the introduction. My cat is biting me. Thufir Hawat slipped into the training room at the... Let's drink some water first. Thufir Hawat slipped into the training room at the Castle Caladan, closed the door softly. He stood there a moment, feeling old and tired in the storm leathered. You need to go. His left leg ached as it had been slashed once in the service of the old Duke. 3 generations of them now, he thought. He stared at the big room, bright with the light of noon, poured through the skylights, and saw the boy seated with the back to the door, intent on papers and charts spread across an L table. How many times must I tell the lad never to settle himself with his back to the door? Hawat cleared his throat. Paul remained bent over his studies. A cloud shadow passed over the skylights. Again, Hawat cleared his throat. Paul straightened, spoke without turning. I know, I'm sitting with my back to the door. Hawat suppressed a smile, strode across the room. Paul looked up at the grizzled old man who stopped at the corner of the table. Hawat's eyes were 2 pools of alertness in a dark and deeply seamed face. I heard you coming down the hall, Paul said, and I heard you open the door. The sounds I make could be imitated. I'd know the difference. He might, at that, Hawat thought. The witch mother of his is giving him the deep training, certainly. I wonder what her precious school thinks of that. Maybe that's why they sent the old proctor here to whip our dear Lady Jessica into line. Hawat pulled up a chair across from Paul, sat down facing the door. He did it pointedly, leaned back, and studied the room. It struck him as an odd place suddenly, a stranger place with most of its hardware already gone off to Arrakis. A training table remained, and a fencing mirror with its crystal prisms quiescent. The table target dummy beside it's patched and padded, looking like an ancient foot soldier maimed and battered in the wars. There stand I, Hawat thought. Thufir, what are you thinking? Paul asked. Hawat looked at the boy. I was thinking we'll be out of here soon and likely never see the place again. Does that make you sad? Sad. Nonsense. Parting with friends is sadness. A place is only a place. He glanced at the charts on the table. And Arrakis is just another place. Did my father send you to test me? Hawat scowled. The boy had been observing ways about him. He nodded. You're thinking it would be nicer if he'd come up himself, but you must know how busy he is. He'll be along later. I've been studying about the storms of Arrakis. The storms, I see. They sound pretty bad. That's too cautious a word, bad. The storms build up across 6,000 or 7,000 kilometers of flatlands, feed on anything that can give them a push. Coriolis forces, other storms, anything that blows up an ounce of energy on it. They can blow up about 700 kilometers an hour, loaded with everything loose that's on their way, sand, dust, everything. They can eat flesh off bones and etch the bones to slivers. Why don't they have weather control? Arrakis has special problems, costs are higher, and there'd be maintenance and the like. The guild wants a dreadful high price for satellite control, and your father's house isn't one of the big rich ones. You know that. Have you ever seen the Fremen? The lad's mind is darting all over today. Howat thought. Like as not, I have seen them, he said. There's little to tell from the folk of the Graben and Sink. They all wear these great flowing robes, and they stink to heaven in any closed space. It's from the suits they wear, call them still suits, that reclaim the body's own water. Paul swallowed, suddenly aware of the moisture in his mouth, remembering the dream of thirst. That people could want for water. They had to recycle their own body moisture struck him as feeling of desolation. Water's precious there, he said. Howat nodded, thinking, perhaps I'm doing it. Getting across from the importance of this planet as an enemy. It's madness to go in there without caution on our inner minds. Paul looked up at the skylight, aware that it had begun to rain. He saw the spreading wetness on the gray metaglass. Water, he said. You'll learn a great concern for water, Howat said. As a duke's son, you'll never want for it, but you'll see the pressures of thirst all around you. Paul wet his lips with his tongue, thinking back to the day a week ago and the ordeal with the Reverend Mother. She, too, had said something about the water starvation. You'll learn about the funeral plain, she said, about the wilderness that is empty, the wasteland that is nothing lives there except the spice and the sandworms. You'll stain your eye pits to reduce the sun glare. Shelter will mean a hollow out of the wind and hidden from view. You'll ride upon your own 2 feet without a thopter or ground car or mount. Paul had been caught more by her tone, sing-song and wavering, than by her words. Then you'll live upon Arrakis, she had said. Kala, the land is empty. The moons will be your friends, the sun your enemy. She had sensed his mother had come up beside him, away from her post, guarding the door. She had looked at the Reverend Mother and asked, Do you see no hope, your reverence? Not for the father. The old woman had waved Jessica to silence and looked down at Paul. Grave this on your memory, lad. A word is supported by 4 things. She held up big forward knuckle fingers. The learning of the wise, the justice of the great, the prayers of the righteous, the valor of the brave. All of those things are as nothing. She closed her fingers into a fist. Without a ruler knows the art of ruling. Make that the science of your tradition. A week had passed since that day with the Reverend Mother. Her words were now only beginning to come full register. Now sitting in the training room with Thufir Hawat, Paul felt a sharp pang of fear. He looked across at the Mentat's puzzled frown. Ooh. My cat has been trying to eat the tree and he keeps trying to barf, but he can't barf because he's been... I swear to God. Okay. Where was I? Let me take a drink. He looked across the Mentat's puzzled frown. I think that's where I was. Where were you wool gathering that time? Howat asked. Did you meet the Reverend Mother? The truth-sayer witch from the Imperium? Howat's eyes quickened with interest. I met her. She, Paul hesitated, found he couldn't look to tell Howat about the ordeal. The inhibitions went deep. Yes? What did she? Paul took two deep breaths. She said a thing. He closed his eyes, calling up the words, and when he spoke, unconsciously took some of the old woman's tone. You, Atreides, descendant of kings, son of duke, must learn a rule. It's something none of your ancestors learned. Paul opened his eyes, said, That made me angry when I said my father rules an entire planet. And she said, He's losing it. I said my father is getting a rich planet. And she said, He'll lose that one too. I wanted to run and warn my father, but she said he'd already been warned. By you, by mother, by many people. True enough, Howat muttered. Is that why you're going? Is that why Is that why we're going? Paul demanded. Because the Emperor ordered it, and because there's hope in spite of what the witch spy said. What else spouted from this ancient fountain of wisdom? Paul looked down at his right hand clenched into a fist beyond the table. Slowly he willed the muscles to relax. She put some kind of hold on me, he thought. How? She asked me to tell her what it is to rule, Paul said, and I said that one commands, and she said I had some unlearning to do. She had a mark there right enough, Hawat thought. He nodded for Paul to continue. She said a ruler must learn to persuade and not to compel. She said he must lay the best coffee hearth to attract the finest men. How'd she figure your father attracted men like Duncan and Gurney? Hawat asked. Paul shrugged. Then she said a good ruler has to learn the world's language, and that's a different for every world. And I thought she meant they didn't speak Gallic or on Arrakis, but she said that it wasn't at all. She said she meant the language of the rocks and growing things, the language you didn't hear just with your ears. And I said that's what Dr. Yu calls the mystery of life. Mystery of life, okay. Howard chuckled. How'd that sit with her? I think she got mad. She said the mystery of life isn't a problem to solve, but a reality to experience. So I quoted the first law of Mentat at her. A process cannot be understood by stopping it. Understanding and just move with the flow of the process, must join it and flow with it. That seemed to satisfy her. He seemed to be getting over it, Hawat thought, but that old witch frightened him. Why did she do it? Thufir, Paul said. Will Arrakis be as bad as she said? Nothing could be that bad, Hawat said, and forced a smile. Take those Fremen, for example, the renegade people of the desert. By first approximation analysis, I can tell you there's many more of them than the Imperium suspects. People live there, lad, a great many people, and Hawat put a sinewy finger beside his eye. They hate Harkonnens with a bloody passion. You must not breathe a word of this, lad. I tell you only as your father's helper. My father has told me of Selous Secundus, Paul said, and do you know, Thufir, it sounded much like Arrakis, perhaps not as bad, but much like it. We really do not know of Seleucia Secunda today, Hawat said. Only what is like long ago, mostly. And what is known, you're right on that score. Will the Fremen help us? It's a possibility. Hawat stood up. I leave today for Arrakis. Meanwhile, you take care of yourself for an old man who's fond of you, eh? Come around here and a good lad sit facing the door. It's not that I think that there's any danger in the castle. It's just a habit I want you to form. Paul got to his feet, moved around the table. You're going today? Today it is, and you'll be following tomorrow. Next time we'll meet it'll be on the soil of your new world. He gripped Paul's right arm at the bicep. Keep your knife arm free, eh? And your shield at full charge. He released the arm, patted Paul's shoulder, rolled and strolled quickly to the door. Thufir, Paul called. Hawat turned, standing in the open doorway. Don't sit with your back to any doors. A grin sped across the seamed old face. That I won't, lad. Depends on it. And he was gone, shutting the door softly behind him. And Paul sat down where Hawat had been, straightened the papers. One more day here, he thought, and he looked around the room. We're leaving. The idea of departure was suddenly more real to him than it had ever been before. He recalled another thing the old woman had said about a world being the sum of many things. The people, the dirt, the growing things, the moons, the tides, the suns. The unknown sum called nature, a vague summation without any sense of a now. And he wondered, what is the now? A door across from Paul banked open, and an ugly lump of a man lurched through it, preceded by a handful of weapons. Well, Gurney Halleck, Paul called. Are you the new weapons master? Halleck kicked the door shut with one heel. You'd rather I play games now, I know, he said, and glanced across the room, noting how its men had already been over it, checking, making it safe for the Duke's heir. A subtle code signs were all around. Paul watched the ugly, rolling man set himself back in motion, veering towards the training table with a load of weapons, and saw a 9-string balisette slung across a Gurney soldier with a multi-pick woven through the strings near the head of the fingerboard. Halleck dropped the weapons on the exercise table, lined them up. The rapiers, bodkins, and kindles, the slow pellet stunners, the shield belts. The ink-vined scar along his jaw writhed as he turned, casting a smile across the room. "So you don't have a good morning for me, you young imp," Halleck said. "And what barb did you sink into the old Hawat? You passed me in the hall like a man running to his enemy's funeral." Paul grinned. Of all his father's men, he liked Gurney Halleck the best. Know the man's moods and deviltry, his humor, the thought of him more as a friend than a hired sword. Halleck swung the bell-set off his shoulder, began turning it. "If you won't talk, you won't," he said. Paul turned, advanced the room, calling out, "Well, Gurney, we do come prepared for music when it's fighting time. It's sass for our elders today," Halleck said. He struck a chord on an instrument, nodded. "Where's Duncan, Idaho?" Paul asked. "Isn't he supposed to be teaching me weaponry?" "Duncan's gone to lead the second wave onto Arrakis. All you have left is poor Gurney, who's fresh out of fight for spoiling for music." He struck another chord, listened to it, and smiled. "And it was decided in council that your being such a poor fighter, we'd be teaching you the music trade, so you won't waste your life entire." "Maybe you'd better sing to me a lay then," Paul said. "I want to be sure how not to do it." "Ah, ha, ha, ha." Gurney laughed, and he swung into Galatian Girls, his multi-picked blur over the Singsy string. "Oh, ho, ho, the Galatian girls will do you for the pearls, and a racking for water. But if you desire dames like consuming flames, try a Caledon daughter." "Not bad for a poor hand with the pick," Paul said. "But if my mother heard you singing a bawdy like that in the castle, you'd have to sing your ears on the outer wall for decoration." Gurney pulled at his left ear. "Poor decoration, too. They have bruised for listening at keyholes, while a young lad I know practiced some strange ditties on his balisette. So you'd forgotten what it's like to stand in your bed." And he pulled his shield from his belt and buckled it fast around his leg. "Then let's fight." Halleck's eyes went wide in mock surprise. "So it's your wicked hand that did the deed? Guard yourself, young master. Guard yourself." He pulled up his rapier, laced the air with it. "I'm a hell fiend out for revenge." Paul lifted his companion rapier, bent it towards his hands. "Stood in agile, stop biting me." 1 foot forward, he let his manner go solemn in a comic imitation of Dr. Yu. "Stop biting me." My cat is biting me. "What a dolt my father sends for weaponry," Paul intoned. "This doltish Gurney Halleck has forgotten the first lesson of the fighting man armed and shielded. Stop biting me." Paul snapped the force, but it intoned at the waist, felt the crinkled skin tingling his defensive field at his forehead, down his back, heard external sounds take on the characteristic shield-filtered flatness. In shield fighting, one moves fast on defense, slow on attack, Paul said. "Stop biting me." "Do you want to fight, kitten? I'm reading. This is just for play. You can't fight for real." Attack has the sole purpose of tricking an opponent into a misstep, stepping him up from the attack from Sinister. The shield turns the fast blow, admits the slow kindle. Paul snapped up his rapier, feinted it in fast, and whipped it back from slow thrust timed to enter the shield's mindless defenses. Halleck watched the action, turned to last minute, and let the blunted blade pass his chest. "Speed! Excellent," he said, "but you were wide open for an underhanded count with the slip tip." Paul stepped back, chagrined. "I should whap your backside for such a carelessness," Halleck said. He lifted a naked kindle from the table and held it up. "This is the hand of an enemy who can let out your life's blood. You're an apt pupil, none better, but I warned you not even to play do you let a man inside your guard with death in his hand." "I guess I'm not in the mood for it today," Paul said. "Mood?" Halleck said. Voice betrayed his outrage, even though his shield's filtering. "What has mood to do with it? You fight when the necessity arises, no matter the mood." Mood's a thing for cattle or making love or playing the balisette. It's not for fighting. I'm sorry, Gurney. You're not sorry enough. Halleck activated his shield, crouched with the kindle out thrust in his left hand, the rapier poised high in his right. Now I say, guard yourself, for true. He leapt high to one side, then forward, pressing a furious attack. Paul fell back, parrying. He felt a field cracking and the shield edges touched and repelled each of them, sense an electric tingling of his contact along his skin. What's gotten into Gurney, he asked himself. He's not faking this. Paul moved to his left hand, dropped his bodkin into his palm from his wrist shield. You see the need for an extra blade? Halleck grunted. Is this betrayal? Paul wondered. Surely not Gurney. Across the room they fought, thrust and parry, feint and counterfeint. Air within their shields grew stale from the demands that it was a slow interchange along barrier edges could not replenish. With each new shield contact, the smell of ozone grew stronger. Paul continued to back, and now he directed his retreat towards the exercise table. If I can turn him beside the table, I'll show him a trick, Paul thought. One more step, Gurney. Halleck took the step. Paul directed the parry downward, turned, and saw Halleck's rapier catch along the table's edge. Paul flung himself aside, thrust the rapier high, and came across Halleck's neckline with the bodkin. He stopped within an inch of his jugular. Is this what you seek? Paul whispered. Look down, lad, Gurney panted. Paul obeyed and saw Halleck's kindle thrust under the table's edge, a tip almost touching Paul's groin. We would have joined each other in death, but I'll admit you fought better when pressed to it. You seemed to get into the mood. He grinned wolfishly, the ink-fine scar rippling along his jaw. The way you came at me, Paul said. Would you have really drawn my blood? Halleck withdrew the kindle, straightened. If you fought one whit beneath your abilities, I'd have scratched you a good one, a scar you'd remember. I'll not have my favorite pupil fall to the first Harkonnen tramp who happens along. Larry, I know you're excited. Paul deactivated his shields, leaned on the table and catch his breath. I deserve that, Gurney, but it would have angered my father if you had hurt me. I'll not have you punished for my failing. As to that, Halleck said, it was my failing, too, and you needn't worry about training scar or two. You're lucky you have so few. As to your father, the Duke punished me only if I failed to make a first-class fighting man out of you, and I'd be failing if I hadn't explained the fallacy in this mood thing you've suddenly developed. Paul straightened, slipped his bodkin back into his wrist sheath. It's not exactly play we do here, Halleck said. Paul nodded. He felt a sense of wonder at the uncharacteristic seriousness in Halleck's manner, the sobering intensity. He looked at the beet-colored ink-fine scar on the man's jaw, remembering the story of how it had been put there by the beast Rabin in Harkonnen's slave pit on Giedi Prime. Paul felt a sudden shame he had doubted Halleck even for an instant. It occurred to Paul then that making of Halleck's scar had been accompanied by pain, a pain as intense perhaps as had been inflicted by a reverend mother. He thrust his thought aside. It chilled their world. I guess I did hope for some play today, Paul said. Things are so serious around here lately. Halleck turned to hide some of his emotions. Something burned in his eyes. It was pain in him, like a blister, all that was left of some yesterday that time had pruned off him. How soon this child must assume his manhood, Halleck thought. How soon he must read that form within his mind, that contract of brutal caution, to enter the necessary fact on the necessary line. Please list your next of kin. Halleck spoke without turning. I sense the play in you, lad. I'd like nothing better than to join in it. There is nothing that can be play. Tomorrow we go to Arrakis. Arrakis is real. The Harkonnens are real. Paul touched his forehead with his rapier blade held vertical. Halleck turned and saw the salute and acknowledged it with a nod. He gestured to the practice dummy. Now we'll work on your timing. Let me catch you that thing sinister. We control it over here when I have full view of the action. I warn you, I'll be trying new counters today. There's a warning you'll not get from a real enemy. Paul stripped up on his toes to relieve his muscles. He felt solemn with a sudden realization that his life had become filled with swift changes. He crossed to the dummy, slapped the switch on his chest, and with the rapier tip felt the defense of forcing his blade away. On guard, Halleck said, and the dummy pressed the attack. Paul activated his shield, parry, and countered. Halleck watched as he manipulated the controls. His mind seemed to be in two parts, one alert to the needs of the training fight, and the other wandering in fly buzz. I'm well-trained fruit tree, he thought. I'm well-trained feelings and abilities, and all of them's grafted onto me, and all bearing for someone else to pick. For some reason he recalled his younger sister, her elfin face so clear in his mind, but she was dead now, in a pleasure house for Halcronan troops. She had loved pansies, or was it daisies? He couldn't remember. It bothered him, he couldn't remember. Paul countered a slow swing of the dummy and brought up his left hand en transier. A little clever devil, Halleck thought, intent now on Paul's interweaving hand motions. He's been practicing and studying on his own. That's not Duncan style, and certainly nothing I taught him. This thought only added to Halleck's sadness. I'm infected by mood, he thought, and began to wonder about Paul, if the boy ever listened fearfully into his pillow throbbing in the night. If wishes were fishes, we'd all cast nets, he murmured. In his mother's expression, he always used it when he felt the blackness of tomorrow on him, and he thought of an odd expression that was taking to a planet that he had never known seas or fishes. That's the end of the chapter. I still have water. It's interesting. Because putting together with the previous chapters, hang on a sec. Because putting with the previous chapters, we've seen a lot of like torture from other people. And this is just another setup of Paul being tortured as a setup to the precursor of going to Arrakis. So Paul is just slowly being tortured, being put through these tests as a way of being brought to Arrakis. Stay out of that tree. So fighty today. All right.